Joining us today for our Senate Education Committee meeting. I know that today is a little bit unusual because the Capitol, even though it's a regular day at the Capitol, but we have a lot more vacancies and we had fewer committee meetings today than typical. So those of you on the committee that are here today, I so appreciate it. I believe we have several that are also watching us on WebEx, correct? You don't have anyone yet? Okay. Yes, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do have a point of personal privilege, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Kim and Robert, I believe you have something special for us today.
Robert says I defer to Kim. Good afternoon, committee. This is a Distinguished Service Award presented by the Kansas Association of the Deaf, KAD, a 114-year-old civil rights organization. This award goes to those who have made a significant contributions to deaf Kansans. The sign language depicted on the award means to collaborate. Today, on behalf of deaf Kansans, the Kansas Association of the Deaf is honored to present the Distinguished Service Award for the 2021 to 2023 term to Senator Molly Baumgardner. This award is emblematic of the fight to ensure that no human being is deprived of language. None more critical than for deaf children, as a worldwide epidemic of language deprivation among deaf babies and children persists since the banishment of signed languages at the 1880 Milan Conference on the Education of the Deaf. That conference took place over 144 years ago. This perpetuated by a myth that spoken auditory languages are superior to signed languages. On the contrary, as Dr. Laura Ann Petito, a prominent cognitive neuroscientist, stated, quote, "The human brain does not discriminate between the hands, the tongue, and the skin. People discriminate, but not our biological human brain," end quote. It is people who discriminate based on the preconceived ideologies, social constructs, policies, and laws. With that in mind, this is a much-deserved award for Senator Molly Baumgardner. She championed drafting and passing of the Language Equality and Acquisition for Deaf Kids, or LEAD-K, bill in 2016 as a crucial step towards eradicating language-depriving teaching methodologies. The bill was quote-unquote blessed and passed without opposition in both the Senate and the House. Since then, year after year, the LEAD-K Language Assessment Program has been collecting data that illustrates what the deaf community has known for decades. More than 80% of deaf kids assessed in Kansas do not meet the language milestones due to that pedagogical myth. In fiscal year 2023, 87% of those assessed did not meet language milestones. Senator Molly Baumgardner is a rare ally who is very much aware of this perpetual and preventable neglect. She steadfastly continues to seek the approval of funding and push to collect data that can lead to a path forward, creating a brighter future where all deaf children meet and exceed language milestones. A future that bans unethical pedagogies and policies, causing irreparable cognitive damage to future deaf children. She is an exemplary role model for other lawmakers, embracing that language is a civil right, a human birthright, whether accessed and acquired through the hands, the tongue, or skin. Senator Molly Baumgardner understands this. Therefore, deaf Kansans are thrilled to extend a heartfelt congratulations to Senator Molly Baumgardner for earning this award. May we present the plaque to you?
First, let me say I need a new vice chair. There aren't supposed to be surprises like that in my committee meeting.
It was worth every minute of it.
So most folks that know me know that I'm usually not without words, but I'm kind of caught without words. This truly was a surprise. I will say with pride that the members that serve on this committee have demonstrated over the years that they care about all kids. Kids that are attending our public schools, kids that are attending our special schools, our school for the deaf and our school for the blind, those that are attending private schools, as well as those that are being schooled in their homes and in their pods, in their communities. I think that the deaf and hard of hearing population has been an important part of my life because I've been a part of that life since I was in 3rd grade and my family moved to Olathe. And so not only did I have kids that were deaf or hard of hearing in my classes, but they also worshiped in my church. And my family spent time there at the school for the deaf as well. I'm going to stop right there because if I think if I say more, it will be incoherent. But I do think that as we move into what is the part of the agenda, it's actually printed in the agenda, is the annual report for language assessment program. And I think that with this report this year, this committee is going to see loud and clear that it's time for us to be taking that next big step. We've collected data for many, many years, and now it's time for us to be looking at that next step and what are we truly going to do to move the dial so that we don't have 83% or more of our kids that are deaf or hard of hearing that are not developing any language. I think, yes, everyone that's sitting at this table has their own children and knows that process of language development. We are going to, on Monday, be working on a large bill about literacy in our state. And we need to make sure that as we are moving forward in that literacy movement, that we are keeping in mind, that we are mindful it needs to be literacy for all children, all children. Whether they are attending school at the School for the Blind, the School for the Deaf, public schools, private schools, but we need to be addressing that issue of literacy. And I think that we will need to give particular attention this next year on what that next step is to be boosting that literacy for kids that are infants all the way to school age that are identified as being deaf or hard of hearing. So we've got a lot of work to do on that. And so I do welcome those that are here representing proudly the deaf community. You need to be putting your thinking hats together. We need to be looking outside the box on how we're going to really bring about change in our state, because we have that data. And so what we need to be doing is finding a way to move that data below the 83%, below 75% before. It's not good enough until we bring it all the way down as far as early literacy for our children. So I am stunned beyond words with this, but I deeply do appreciate this recognition. Thank you. So at this point, we are going to begin the annual report of Language Assessment Program Deaf and Hard of Hearing fiscal year 2023 review.
Of the committee, thank you. I am Erin Schuweiler, and I am the coordinator of the Sound Start Birth to 3 program at the Kansas School for the Deaf. And I have been involved in the development of the language assessment program for deaf hard of hearing since the law was passed. Angie Walker, who is our current coordinator for the LAP DHH program, couldn't be here today, and she deeply regrets not being able to be here. I did want to let you know that we will have a new LAP coordinator starting next year, and she is here with us today, Julie Bustos. So I will be presenting on behalf of Angie today. The Language Assessment Program for Deaf and Hard of Hearing provides a vital service that allows professionals who have the training, expertise, and experience in the language development of deaf children to collaborate with and support families, service providers, and school districts who work with those children. You may recall from previous presentations that we know that early fluent communication is critical and essential to typical cognitive, social, and emotional development of any child. We also know that children who are deaf and hard of hearing frequently do not have complete access to language, whether it be spoken or signed. This can cause interruptions in the natural development of their language. The purpose of LAP DHH is to assess, monitor, and track the development of all deaf and hard of hearing children ages birth through 8 throughout the state of Kansas. That includes all deaf hard of hearing children, regardless of whether or not they are receiving special education services, regardless if they use spoken language or a sign language, and regardless of if they have a mild hearing loss, a unilateral hearing loss, or a profound hearing loss in both ears. The intent is to provide the data necessary to determine whether current interventions are effective and should be continued, or whether alternative instruction should be considered. From July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2023, 133 deaf and hard of hearing children were assessed through the language assessment program. 56 of those were ages birth to 3, 30 were 3 to 5-year-olds, and 47 were ages 5 through 8. The map on page 2 of the report will indicate the location of the children receiving those assessments. We use a very specific assessment process, which includes obtaining and analyzing one or more language samples, language development checklists, and/or standardized language assessments. The assessments are administered in the child's home environment or their school setting. All of the assessments were administered and analyzed by the LAP DHH specialists who have been trained in the specific administration of those assessments. Using the results of the assessments, we complete a language milestones document to indicate whether or not the child has met their age-appropriate language milestones in ASL, English, or both. The results I am presenting are based on that document, and they represent the collected data of all children assessed. So again, we assessed 133 children. 116, or 87% of those, did not meet age-appropriate milestones in either ASL or English. 17, or 13%, did meet those age-appropriate milestones. Of those, 14 were ages birth to 3, 1 was age 3 to 5, and 2 were ages 5 through 8. 71 children were assessed in ASL. 94% of them, or 67 children, did not meet the age-appropriate milestones. 109 children were assessed in English, and 86% did not meet their milestones. 19 children were identified as having additional disabilities. When accounting for children who had an identified secondary disability, 86% of those children did not meet milestones in either ASL or spoken English. So there's not a significant difference when including or excluding children with secondary disabilities. These results have been consistent since the beginning of the program. The statute also requires our annual report to include existing data from the state performance plan on pupils with disabilities. We get this data directly from the Kansas State Department of Education. The portion of the performance plan that is most relevant to LAP is indicator 7.B1, which is the percent of preschool children ages 3 through 5 with IEPs who demonstrate improved acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, including early language and communication and early literacy. During the 22-23 school year, which would be fiscal 22, when looking at preschool children whose primary or secondary disability was not deaf or hard of hearing, results indicated that 88.26% of preschool children demonstrated an improvement in acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, which includes that early language and communication. When looking at children whose primary or secondary disability was deaf, hard of hearing, 90.91% demonstrated improvement. However, there are several caveats that we need to consider when analyzing this data. The state performance plan report only includes children who are 3 through 5 or until they leave preschool. And as you know, our numbers reflect children ages birth through 8. The state data is comparing students who are deaf and hard of hearing to other children with identified disabilities, while ours looks at the language development of deaf, hard of hearing children compared to what is expected for typically developing children. And finally, the state data looks at demonstrated improved acquisition and use of any knowledge and skills. While this includes early language and communication, it is not limited to language development, whereas the LAP DHH looks primarily at language growth. These caveats are important to consider when we compare the numbers because we're not looking at exactly the same group of children, nor are we comparing the exact same skills. So this is one example that draws attention to the need to use specific assessments to monitor language development of our deaf, hard of hearing children, as well as the need for in-depth analysis by professionals who have training, experience, and expertise in working with children who are deaf and hard of hearing. There are services and screenings in place, but they are not meeting the needs of this particular group of children, which has led to this statute. In addition to collecting data to fulfill the requirements of the law, the LAP DHH collaborates with researchers at Vanderbilt University, Temple University, and Sacramento State. They are investigating various research questions using our LAP DHH data to improve the education of students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Their most recent research questions looked at ways to determine the rate of language growth from across multiple time points for users of ASL and spoken English, using our ASL English language milestones tool, as well as patterns of relationships among several characteristics of social identity and language development. Preliminary data in those areas show that most participants show gaps in their ASL and/or their English spoken language skills relative to age expectations. Although some children are narrowing the gap between their typically developing peers, most are not doing so at a rate to catch up to their peers. When looking at social identity, findings from this preliminary analysis show lower English language skills for deaf and hard of hearing children of color relative to their white peers, when excluding 6 participants with a secondary diagnosis. For ASL, the difference between children of color and white children was non-significant. However, the large effect size warrants additional investigation with a larger sample. When analyzing urban versus non-urban, there was also no significant difference in language skills. Limited access to language, signed and/or spoken, is a primary factor in causing the language delays of children who are deaf and hard of hearing. The potential impacts of those delays have significant, long-reaching effects. Language delay can have a negative effect on the child's social, emotional well-being, their disposition, cognitive ability, daily living skills, and the ability to be a contributing tax-paying citizen. The LAP DHH supports families and local service providers and teachers by identifying the language needs of their deaf, hard of hearing children, as well as suggesting interventions that can be implemented to prevent these language delays from developing in the first place. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Committee, what questions do you have? We'll start with Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for your report. It was very interesting. So when you were talking about secondary disabilities, what exactly are you talking about, and are there any commonalities in those secondary disabilities among the group?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I don't have that data directly in front of me, but just based on my field work and experience, the variety of additional disabilities ranges from, we have from cognitive to physical to very much, but we could look at that data further.
I would just be interested.
Sure, I would be happy to take that back to our team to look into.
Follow up?
You sure can.
So on the limited access to the language piece in your conclusions, how do we, impact that? Is there something we need to be doing to make sure that that limited access is improved?
Yes, thank you,
Is that a
Senator.
family issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have some systems that we have in place at the Kansas School for the Deaf to try and support families. But obviously our data is showing that additional supports and services, including frequency of support to families, I think will be necessary to effect a real change for families.
Mm-hmm. Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. My question is on the map of the number of children assessed in each county.
Mm-hmm.
Johnson County is significantly higher. Is that because of the school, or do you have the staff needed to do the assessments? I'm just trying to look at why we have so much there and then fewer in the other counties.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. So there's a couple of factors that are in play. So when we developed this program, we needed to phase it in due to the way the staffing KSD absorbed the first 2 years of the program. And so we started with children we were already seeing. And so we had built relationships with early intervention networks across the state of Kansas, but most heavily, obviously, in like Johnson County and Wyandotte County. But we have staff all across the state of Kansas. We are going as wherever those children are and providing those assessments.
You have a follow-up?
Yes, a follow-up. So in those other counties, because Johnson and Wyandotte, you do have that established. Are the relationships being established more? Are people more open to have these assessments?
Thank you, Senator. Yes. So yes, I think, if you're looking at Western Kansas, of course, that we don't have as many children who are deaf and hard of hearing out there. So you will never see the types of numbers that you might see in Johnson County. But yes, we are developing those relationships. And as we have the resources available, we are continuing to expand our LAP program. We have every intention to meet all of the deaf and hard of hearing children across the state of Kansas. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to drill down a little bit more. With the children that were assessed, Did you measure how many of them had parents that were hearing and how many had parents that were deaf or hard of hearing?
Thank you for that question. I know that we did. I am not sure if I have that data in front of me. I mean, the national data suggests that 95% of children who are deaf and hard of hearing are born to hearing parents. So if I were to guess, I would guess that that would be a similar percentage here, but I would be happy to get back with you about that.
Well, part of the reasoning for my question is knowing that it's a high percentage of kids that are deaf or hard of hearing that have hearing parents. Had those hearing parents received training for ASL?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. So we do have programs in place for birth to 3, providing especially, I'd like to highlight our Deaf Mentor program, which we provide both on Zoom and in person to provide one-on-one ASL supports for families. But of course, that is grant funded, and so I think we are seeing an increased need for ASL assessments, which I think leads to increased need for ASL supports.
Well, that's one of those things that as we're talking about taking the next steps, where are those services being, are they readily available? If they're not, how do we make them readily available? And then learning from parents that are hearing but have a child that's deaf or hard of hearing, what are the obstacles from them receiving that training? I see that as something that we'll want to look at. I'm also curious of any of the kids that were assessed, did we track how many of them had either like a BAHA or a cochlear implant or a hearing aid?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we did do some preliminary data in anticipation of that question this year. So we're still fine-tuning our data, so this is our best estimate at the moment, but about 70% of them have some sort of amplification that they're using.
Okay, and so for those that have the amplification, part of what you shared, it's the verbal language acquisition, but also the ASL. So are parents being coached or trained in how verbally, for those that are not themselves deaf or hard of hearing, are they being trained on how to reinforce that language acquisition?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so that is basically the primary goal of our Birth to 3 program at the Kansas School for the Deaf. So we partner with the early intervention programs across the state of Kansas to provide that specialized support and work with families specifically in language acquisition for those children.
My last question has to do with, and you may not, this is not a part of the study, but it's the process in the state of Kansas. So, oh. Sorry. So, it was almost on cue. So when we have a newborn, hospital does a hearing test, and the infant doesn't pass. So they're scheduled to go to a clinic or somewhere for the retesting. So do we know, does the Department of Health provide information on what percentage are actually going back for retesting? And with that retesting, what percentage of those are found to be deaf or hard of hearing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, the answer is yes, that is all being tracked. The Sound Beginnings Newborn Hearing Screening Program, that is their mandate, is to track all of the children who are being screened, make it on to diagnostic, and then get referred to early intervention. And they're also tracking whether or not they're getting enrolled in early intervention. So while I don't personally have that data is readily available. I sit on that committee, and they regularly share that type of data with us.
And the only reason I bring that up is I think that's going to be part of that discussion again as we're moving forward. It's one thing to collect the data, but if the data is not being used and it's not being used to drive change, participation with the parents or the caregivers, then we've got We've got to do something to impact what's happening with the Department of Health as well. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, I thank you so much for being here and for sharing the information. And as you collect up some of that data, some of what was requested by Senator Dietrich, Senator Sykes, and myself, if you could get that and get it emailed to our assistant, she'll make sure that the rest of the committee receives that information.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Committee, we are going to move on to the next portion, and that is a briefing on our annual foster care report card. And we have Rebecca Gerhardt, Director of Permanency from the DCF, that's here today. Welcome to committee, Rebecca. And you might want to move your mic down.
Down
And on.
and turn it on.
There we go.
Hopefully that is correct. So Chairman Baumgartner, Vice Chairman Erickson, Ranking Minority Member Sykes, I'd like to thank you for welcoming us here today to talk to you about the 2022-23 Kansas Foster Care Annual Academic Report Card. This report card is an opportunity for DCF and our partners at the Kansas Department of Education to collaborate to learn about the outcomes and needs of students who are experiencing a need for foster care. My name is Rebecca Gerhardt, and since this is my first opportunity to come and talk to you all, I thought I would take a little bit of time and introduce myself. I'm the Director of Permanency and Licensing at the Kansas Department for Children and Families and started working in this position in June of 2023. Prior to taking this position, I worked in the DCF Northeast and Southeast regions as the lead attorney, and have also served as a staff attorney in the Kansas City region. Throughout my career, I have also worked in the Jackson and Lyon County Attorney's offices as a prosecutor, though I started my career working for DCF as a social worker. I think you all probably have my written testimony before you, and so I thought that instead of reading that, I would discuss some parts of it, though I'm happy to answer questions about it in its entirety. Each year, this report card and our testimony mentions some specific things: collaboration, coordination, communication, and these things are key to improving educational attainment for youth who are in foster care. And as part of our testimony today, we've provided stories from a couple of youth in foster care who, through their own hard work and through the work that they did walking alongside education and social welfare professionals, were able to truly move forward with their education and to do so in a way that has allowed them to achieve some things that I think maybe even they didn't think that they would be able to do prior to their work with the virtual school that they were attending. Equally as important, the collaborations give us an opportunity to improve the educational experiences and attainment, not only for those youth who are in foster care, but also for other students who are within school districts as we collaborate with those education professionals who are working in the communities. Included in the data, or in the report, you'll see that the total number of youth experiencing a need for foster care continues to decrease. We appreciate the support of all the branches of state government that has allowed that to move forward. We believe that trend will continue, and we think that is good news for every Kansas family and every Kansas school. While there was a decrease in the statewide graduation rate throughout the state, the graduation rate for children who are experiencing a need for foster care did increase by 5.3%. We also know that that attendance generally is improving for youth who are experiencing need for foster care, both with their attendance rate going up and their chronic absenteeism rate going down. We've also seen an increased percentage of youth who are in foster care being enrolled in at-risk preschool programs or special education programs. And despite the number of youth who are in foster care, experiencing need for foster care decreasing, we have seen more youth enrolled within our school districts in their mental health intervention team programming. That is always hard to say in one sentence or in one phrase. So while the number of foster care, youth experiencing foster care stays, decreased by 285 between the last report and this report. We saw an increased number of students participating in those mental health services. We appreciate the opportunity that this report provides, not only for us to improve outcomes, but to increase and maintain our collaborations with our colleagues at KSDE, as well as our colleagues in our local school districts. DCF is committed to utilizing this data and what it tells us to help us learn about the impacts that a child's stay in foster care has on their education. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
We're at that appropriate time. Committee, what questions do you have? We'll start with Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. So on your chart of assessments and the performances and the levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, it would be helpful to me to know the grouping for like elementary, middle, and then high school, just to see if there's some area that we need to focus on more with our foster kids.
So I'm certainly happy to work with our partners at KSDE.
Possible to do that?
I am happy to work with our partners at KSDE to see if that is possible. I believe that there is a representative from KSDE here as well, who may have some more information about whether or not it is possible to break the data down in that way. I just simply don't know.
Sure.
We have several here from
do.
the Department of Ed, so who wants to come forward and let us know if we're able to do that? Welcome, Deputy Commissioner.
So Frank Harwood, Deputy Commissioner for the Kansas Department of Education. So yes, that information could be available. Some of the report that you get is I guess, an extension of the school report card, which originally was by legislation limited to 1 page. So that's why it didn't get expanded. That information is available. We could do
And
that.
regular report cards are front and back, so.
So actually, we stretched it to 1 page by making it front and back.
Oh, okay.
But yes, that we could make that information available.
I think that would be helpful. Did you have a follow-up?
May I? Yes, I do.
Okay. And then
So-
Senator Sykes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the information about students who get expelled and how that's increased slightly, but you also have some data on students with mental health using the MHIT pilot program. I'm just interested if there's a connection between the kids who are getting expelled and the increase, and are they then perhaps have they accessed the mental health programming? Because sometimes you find that kids who are misbehaving sometimes do have a mental health issue as their foundational problem. Any correlation there?
I don't know the answer to that, but we'd be happy to look into it. I don't know if the same students who, I know we are tracking the specific students who have been suspended or expelled, so I think we can also correlate to whether or not they're accessing those mental health in schools. We'll be happy to get back to you on that.
Mental health issues. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. So is it possible, and I know you all report what we require you to report, but just kind of digging down into these, like I know a lot of foster children are in the same home, but several have to move from home to home. Is there a way to look at kind of separating maybe kids who are in maybe a more stable foster environment as opposed to those bouncing from place to place?
So I don't know that that is information that we currently have gathered, but certainly I think that is something we could look at. If I may, I have a clarifying question just to make sure the answer we send back is the same question that you're asking. So what you'd like to see is for youth who are in a more stable placement, what are their, where are they falling in those assessment levels? Where are they falling in those attendance levels, things like that? Is that correct?
That is correct.
I will certainly look to see what we can pull together and pull together as much as we can.
Thank you.
I think I think that's an excellent question. It will become a little bit difficult, and the Department of Ed, that's going to take some work, because it's a matter of tracking how much movement has occurred even that particular year, because the assessment, when it occurs in the spring, there's no way of knowing when you're just collecting that raw data, how long they've even been in that school district. Whereas we know some kids that have been in foster care for 5 years haven't necessarily been moved around, and other kids could be in foster care for less than a year and they've been moved around maybe 5 or 6 times. So that would be a little bit of a challenge, but I think the tracking, though, is based on the student number that's assigned to the child, and then we'd have to track to see how many different districts or buildings they'd been in. Could you talk to us a little bit about expulsion? Because we're talking, based on what's in the report card, we're talking about expulsion it's great that the number of days have decreased from 151 on average to 80. But when you think of how many days are in a month, classroom days in a month, you're talking about major swaths of time. So when the children, do we know what the ages are of kids that have been expelled? Is it safe to say it's just high schoolers, or are we talking middle schoolers, or could it include elementary kids?
So I know we are specifically tracking that right now to see what those trends are, because we also did not have a good picture of exactly what that looked like. So we are also tracking that. The last tracking I saw, those seemed to be primarily middle school and high school kids, but not all of them.
So do we have any data as far as, is there a correlation with kids that have been expelled that are also runners in foster care? And if they're not running, what are they doing during the day when they're looking at 80 days of being expelled? Because that's roughly, 4 months worth of a school year.
Thank you. And that is one of the questions we are also trying to work through, is what does a day look like for a youth who has been expelled, not only to ensure that they are continuing to receive an education, but also to support the placement. So we have partnered with KSDE to really look at, for each of those individual youth, what can we do with those? So our educational coordinators within our agency, as well as the educational coordinators at the case management providers, are really looking at those individual kids to see what does that day look like for them, because that has been a challenge. What does, if for a child who is not in foster care, if they are expelled from school, then their parents need to find a plan for them. Standing in those shoes, we are also needing to find a plan for them. And so we've been working with KSDE to figure out what are the educational opportunities that could still be utilized for a youth who has been expelled from their home district.
So we don't have a set procedure or policy for someone that's in foster care that's expelled. Is that right?
No, there is not there is not one answer that fits every youth who has been expelled from a school. And so we're exploring that for each child who experiences an expulsion, and working with either their local district on options for education, or if the local district is unable or unwilling, not unwilling, every district wants to provide an educational opportunity to every youth. That was poorly phrased sentence, my apologies. If they're not able to provide that educational opportunity, then working with our virtual schools or our charter schools or all of those other opportunities that exist within Kansas to find an opportunity for each of those youth.
So if a child's in a foster home and both foster parents work and that foster child is expelled, where does that foster child go during the day?
For some of our youth, that is working with other connections within their community to help provide that daytime care. For younger youth, that may be a daycare center or some other childcare center. For some of our youth, that may be accessing some sort of a day service provider, whether that's in their local community or through their mental health center. All of these scenarios are very different, and the needs of each of the youth are very different. And so it's very difficult to say, this is the one answer that fits all of these youth who have been expelled.
So I don't think I see it in here, but how many youth do we think last year that are in foster care were either suspended or expelled? Am I just missing that in the report?
I am double checking. It does not look like I put it in my testimony. I believe it's in the report card. If you'll give me just a second, I will double check. If not, that is a number we can get for you.
I know it's in your testimony. I just didn't see it in the report card. Oh.
Oh,
Phoned a friend.
I did
There we
phone
go.
a friend, though I feel like I should let my friend talk about his own data. It would appear that across racial groups, there were 13 foster care youth who were expelled, and that's where that average number of days comes from. I was looking to see if I could give you a page number for that chart in the page 10 in the foster care report card itself.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you with that. Committee, yes. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just looking on the report card under graduation rates, and among those subgroups that are listed, I noticed that the Hispanic subgroup only has a difference in graduation rates between foster care students and all other state students of less than 5%, 4.8%, whereas all of the other subgroups have a difference of at least 20 points among those. Could that be because of the reason that those students were placed in foster care?
I would hate to speculate. I think that is a possible answer. It could also have to do with the number of students in that racial subgroup that are in foster care. I don't have that information to be able to answer that with any certainty.
Okay, I think right above it in the other graph here, it shows that 14.98% of foster care students are Hispanic, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just, thinking about this of all of the different reasons that children are placed in foster care. And I think we know that the Hispanic community is very family-centric. And so that I'm just wondering if some of those things play into the likelihood of whether that child is going to succeed in or graduate from high school in a traditional setting or not. So I'm just curious to see more about that information.
So I could certainly pull data on reasons for removal for different racial groups and provide that to the committee.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. It's fascinating, and I'm trying to dig in and understand it as we go. So if this is self-evident, my apologies. But I'm looking at the ISS and OSS numbers, and I know that the total number of students, those are unique. But in my experience as a principal, rarely do we have a student that only gets one ISS or OSS. So is there repeat ISS or OSS numbers available? Because it looks like those are only unique numbers.
I will need to phone that friend again. That is a KSDE data collection question, so I don't know that I can answer it.
That sheet is up there, so I can't.
Madam Chair, Brian Dempsey, Assistant Director of Special Education Teleservices. I think it's on here. If you have the report card in front of you, These are all foster kids, and then total students, total suspended. So I think they're included, but we'll double check to make sure and let you know. So you want to break out how many times a unique student was suspended?
Well, I understand in the explanation in the beginning before the tables, it says that the total suspended number are unique. And so I'm wondering then if the average day suspended and percent suspended, if that's just based on the unique number, or is that reflective of those frequent flyers, as we lovingly refer them to in the education? I don't know that frequent flyers are reflected in this, and that's what I was asking.
I'll verify that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, other questions? I'm not seeing any more. So again, kind of similar to what we had said after Aaron's presentation, that go ahead and provide us with, as you gather that information, make sure it gets to Cindy, and then she will distribute it to us. So committee, I did, just as a little background reminder, the annual foster care report card came out of learning that DCF and the Department of Education were not working together to share data about high school graduation completion. And they just had to kind of guess how many kids were in foster care, that were in foster care, actually were graduating from high school. And so that's when we did come up with the report card. We were the second state in the United States to come up with a report card. And so guess what we have found as we started tracking this information? There was new focus and effort, and we started to find more kids were actually starting to graduate from high school. So we certainly want to make sure that we get the data that has been also an additional data that's been requested, so that we can continue to drill down. This isn't about just collecting numbers, collecting data points, but it's what are we doing with that information? And it's that the agencies as well as the legislature need to work together, because we want kids that enter into foster care, we don't want that to mean that they're not going to be able to gain that education, graduate from high school, and then move on to college. We've spent a lot of time and effort to make sure that there are opportunities available for kids after they graduate from high school so that they can earn that college education, that the scholarships pay for them to earn that education. We're still finding that too many kids in foster care in high school don't know that they're eligible. So we'll continue to work with that as well. Committee, tomorrow we are going to have, the presentation is going to be specifically on special education funding. So it's going to be, it really is going to be SPED Funding 101. We're going to drill down why we're seeing these inconsistencies of distribution. The commissioner and the deputy commissioner have been working to gather information specifically about how the different types of either, if the school district provides their own SPED services, or if they're a member of a co-op or an interlocal, the different ways in which even the federal money is drawn down. Oddly enough, federal money isn't, I'm going to make sure that I got this right, and the deputy will correct me, but the funding from the feds isn't a 12-month, it's not a 24-month, but it's a 27-month. And so he's going to talk a little bit about that and the way in which, good, I got that right. That's something I learned new today, that it's the 27-month, but the way in which we're measuring it, the way in which they draw it down, that's just one of the elements that we want to look at. And I did request that the Department of Ed circle back around, because we did, as a committee, work on the department's budget. There was a recommendation that came from the State Board of Education as far as funding for SPED. There was also a recommendation from the governor as far as funding for SPED, but there were still a lot of unanswered questions, and they have been re-looking at data, looking specifically at the differences in percentages that districts that provide their own services, how that differs from those that are in interlocals or co-ops. And so we will have that information. We'll work step by step, but bring your questions for that. We have to move forward with regard to fixing something that appears to be very broken, and that is the way in which we're funding special education. And we're definitely, tomorrow is going to be a portion where we're really going to be getting into the weeds. Not so much what the dollar amounts are, but the imbalance in proportionality for our different districts. So I do thank everyone that was here today.